Dennis, why don't we get started?
Okay. Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Galucki, and welcome to the 483rd Imagine Greater Buffalo program and our 105th virtual Imagine program, hosted by our wonderful Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. We're so glad you've joined us today. This program is created by ImagineLifelongLearning.com and the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, Cezanne, which is a digital enterprise and network designed to help link volunteers and lifelong learning communities. Now, before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, you can type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channels, and we hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speaker, Angela Keppel. Angela is an urban planner and historian, a lifelong Buffalonian. She lives in the juxtaposition between where we've been and where we're going as a city. Since 2011, she has run the blog Discovering Buffalo One Street at a Time, where she uncovers the stories of Buffalo's streets. She works as a project planner with Buffalo Place, Inc., the downtown business district. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from Niagara University and a Master's in Urban Planning from UB. She is the 2022 recipient of the O&B Augsburger Award from the Buffalo History Museum for excellence in local history. She lives at the Hotel Lafayette and can often be seen exploring Buffalo on her bicycle, named after her favorite Buffalonian, Samuel Wilkinson. Well, now let's hear from Angela Keppel. Angela, take it away.
Great. Let me just share my slideshow. What's happening? So as Dennis said, I was born and raised in Buffalo. I work as an urban planner, and urban planning really looks at how cities are going to be into the future. But I've always been really interested in history, looking at how things were in the past. And so my blog kind of meshes those two things together. It all started because I wanted to know how Keppel Street got its name. That's my last name. And so I started doing research all these years later, and I still don't know who Keppel Street was named after. But I've started writing a blog to share the stories of who streets were named after. So you can find my blog at buffalostreets.com. So I thought I'd start today with one of the most common how street name. And so you can see here that you can find the city code if you're really interested. There's a couple more paragraphs here. But in the section 86.3, it goes into the details. It starts with a request that can be either members of the public, from common council, or from the mayor. So the request has to be a proposed name. If there is a name, why you want to change it, or justification for why that name is chosen. So if council approves the name, they hold a public hearing, and then the public are allowed to come and provide comment on the potential name. After the public hearing, they hold a vote, and it has to be 3/4 of council approval in order to approve a name change. So now, if you guys all want to go to council and make some street name changes, you know how. But the first name in Buffalo were part of planned street grids. Most people know about street grids because of New York City, the commissioner's plan there, which set up all of the streets going across the island to the north, and then the avenues going up and down the island, all with numbers. So that's a very precise square rectangular street grid. In Buffalo, our street grid was laid out by Joseph Ellicott in 1804. He was an agent for the Holland Land Company. They owned most of the land in Western New York. And Joseph was a surveyor who came here. He laid out our original streets. He selected a radial street plan, which is very similar to the street plan that is in Washington, D.C. And so we have radial streets which radiate like spokes on a wagon wheel from Niagara Square. And so he named the streets after Native American tribes that were in the area. That's where we get street names such as Chippewa and Mohawk. And then also he named some of the streets after Dutch investors. For example, Main Street was Willink, who was one of the Dutch investors. Over time, those names were changed, and then we got, Main Street and Pearl and Washington. Those streets were changed over time. And then Buffalo actually has two planned street grids. The portion of Western New York that was not owned by the Holland Land Company was the portion along the Niagara River. There was a 1 mile strip. And so that part was owned by New York State. And so New York State wanted to build a village in this area. And so Peter Porter, who was a congressman, was working with the state to lay out what was then the village of Black Rock. Now we would refer to this area as kind of the lower west side. Sometimes it's called the West Village. But Peter Porter named the streets after states and numbers. So that's where we get Georgia, Virginia, Carolina streets. And then the numbered streets, and if you're familiar with the West Side, you know that the numbers are kind of wacky. There's a 4th Street and a 7th Street, but where's 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6? And that's because streets over the years were changed. And so the numbered streets we have are non-sequential because they're the streets that haven't yet been changed. And so here's an example of a street that changed, one of those numbered streets. So this was 10th Street, which became Fargo Avenue. If you look in the center of the map on the left, you kind of see a large building that says WG Fargo underneath it. So that was Mr. Fargo's house, his large mansion. And you can see Fargo Street runs to the left. West of his property. And so when he moved there, he was able to have the street name changed. He was the founder of American Express and Wells Fargo. He was also a mayor of Buffalo. So he had a lot of influence. So it was pretty easy for him to be able to say, hey, I'm going to move here. Can we name the street after me? And so they were able to change the name there. This is one of my favorite street name changes because I just think it's very interesting. There was a street called Bouck Avenue. It was named after Governor Bouck, who was a governor of Buffalo. He was very influential in helping get the Erie Canal built during those times. And so they named a street after him. And then in 1894, the Lafayette Presbyterian Church, which was located on Lafayette Square downtown, they wanted to move. The central business district was becoming a business district. And so the churches wanted to move out to what was considered the suburbs at the time. And so they were moving north to what we would now call the Elmwood Village. and they were at the corner of Elmwood and Bouck Avenue, and they wanted to take their name with them. They didn't want to become the Bouck Avenue Presbyterian Church. They wanted to stay Lafayette Presbyterian, and so they were able to rename the street, and it became Lafayette Avenue, which is a pretty major east-west thoroughfare through that part of the city. So poor Governor Bouck, there's no street name after him. We've kind of forgotten him, but we remember Lafayette in several ways. Lafayette High School is located on that street. Lafayette Square still has his name, and those are named after General Lafayette, the Revolutionary War hero. I just think it's really interesting because this is a street that's named after a church, but it's not Church Street or St. Matthew's or St. Michael's. It's Lafayette. I think that's a very interesting Buffalo fact. So when a street is first developed, often they'll have to come up with a name. One of the most common ways is that the developers who are developing the area will name the street. And so sometimes it'll be named after the developer who's building the houses or the person who owned the land prior. So Connolly Ave, it's a short street that runs off of Bailey. The land that it was originally on was owned by John Connolly, who worked in the shipbuilding business. So when the city laid out the street, they named it after him. You can see this ad for building houses on Connolly Ave back in the late 1920s for $5 down and just $1 a week. That would be about $17 a week and $88 down in today's dollars. So too bad we didn't buy houses back then. Sometimes when someone builds a development, they'll name the streets after their family members. This one's also, I think, very interesting. When Harold Bickford developed a subdivision near Kensington and Bailey, he named 13 streets after his family members. So if you see Bickford, Davidson was his wife's maiden name. Alice, Phyllis, Martha, Gail, Millicent, Edith, Godfrey, Leonard, Hastings was somebody's middle name, Kay, and Janet. And so all of those streets were named after the Bickford family members. You still see this sometimes in the suburbs where streets will have a bunch of women's names. And a lot of times it's the developers' wives and daughters trying to throw their names into the development. So here, this is a map of all of the streets I've written about so far. I've written 220 streets so far, which has been really fun. There are 1,544 street names in the city of Buffalo, so I still have a long ways to go. People often ask how I select which street to write about, and it varies. I do try to make sure I'm covering streets in all parts of the city. So if I've written a lot about North Buffalo, then maybe I try to find a post to write about a street on the east side or South Buffalo, just to make sure that I'm kind of dispersing things throughout the city. Sometimes when I'm writing about a street, it's relatively easy and there's a lot of information about some of our Buffalonians. For example, Millard Fillmore gives his name to the Fillmore Avenue, the Fillmore District. There's lots of information about him. He was a president. Lewis Valley Allen, he's another pretty well-known Buffalonian. His street was Allen Street, and the Allentown neighborhood is named after him. He was President Grover Cleveland's uncle and very well known in Buffalo, so there's more information about him as well. Mary Talbert was in her time known as the most famous colored woman in the country. Though she often said in interviews that she was more well known outside of Buffalo than she was in Buffalo. She was working really hard for civil rights around the turn of the last century, and was very influential in the Niagara movement, which actually held its first meetings at her home on Michigan Avenue. The Talbert Mall and Mary Talbert Boulevard are named after her. George Urban was another well-known Buffalonian. His flour mills produced wheat for most of Northeast United States back when Buffalo was the milling capital of the US. So there was a lot of information about him. Some older people actually still remember Urban Flour or Liberty Flour, which was one of their flour brands. And so it was these people. It's a little easier when there's more sources. And then sometimes I get inspired when I'm looking at a map. So sometimes I'll be researching something totally different. This is an example. Last fall, I was looking up information about an old house that I saw for sale on Zillow, and I wanted to know what year it was built. So I was looking at old maps. I pulled up this 1872 map, and I saw this long, skinny building that you'll see circled here, and it says Rope Walk. And I was like, what the heck is a rope walk? And so I had to research. It was home to George Pooley and Sons Rope Walk. These were the businesses that built rope. And all of that rope was used on the ships in the Great Lakes that were used. And so Buffalo really made a lot of rope back in the day, something I had never thought about. This was one of the longest rope walks in Buffalo. And inside the rope walk, there'd be the fibers that the ropes are made out of and the machinery. And there was men that would be the rope walkers who would kind of bring the rope through the machines, and then they would walk this long rope walk, and they'd walk back and forth to make whatever length of rope they required. And so this was one of the longest in Buffalo, so they could build longer ropes. And so Pooley Place and Cordage Alley were named because this was such a center of rope making back in the days when Great Lakes shipping was so important. This was a relatively quick post for me to write because it was just so interesting. And I got so excited about this thing that I had never even considered before. Sometimes research takes a little longer, but I really enjoy learning these stories and sharing these lesser known stories. Box Avenue, that's one that surprised me. It's a small street on the east side, and I always thought maybe there was a box company located on the street. I knew FN Burt was a very large box company. Maybe there was others. And so since, box is a noun, I thought maybe that's what it was named after. It's actually named after Henry Box, who was a developer and built the houses on that street. Person Street, that's another one that you kind of think like, oh, it's people, places, and things. It's just a person. But it's actually named after Charles Person, and they were a huge whiskey distillery. And the company went out of business just before Prohibition, and the lines were like around the block for weeks while they were selling all of their whiskey, so people could stock up before Prohibition. And it was kind of like a widely known secret in Buffalo that the Person family stockpiled enough whiskey at their house to last the whole Prohibition. And I just thought that was really interesting. Leopold Warner, he owned land where Springer Avenue is located now and developed the houses there. When it came time to name the street, and the city was like, okay, what do you want to name the street? Do you want to name it Warner? And he said, there's too many Warner families in Buffalo. Why don't we name it something different? And so he selected Springer, which after his wife's maiden name, her name was Lena Springer. Fun fact about the Warners, he was in the clothing business and he got his start selling caps that Lena made. His business grew, and they were one of the largest clothing companies in Western New York, and they were located in the building where Pearl Street Grill is now. So if you've ever gone to have a drink at Pearl Street before a Sabres game or whatever, you've been in where his clothing business was located back in the day. So to put together my blog, I do a lot of research. People often ask how I do my research. Most of it happens at the library. That's why I'm really happy to do these kind of talks, because I do value the library so much. I spend a lot of time in the Grosvenor room with the local history collection. I also spend a lot of time looking at microfilm, and I think a lot of researchers really hate using microfilm. For some reason, I really like it. It reminds me of being in elementary school and learning how to do it when I was very young. And so I spend a lot of time looking at old books. There's not really a lot of this kind of research online. You know, my website is creating the site about how the streets were named. And so it's a lot of looking through old books. I try to make sure that I put out information that's as accurate as possible. That's why I always include my sources on my posts. And so sometimes research can take a really long time because I might find conflicting information, and I want to make sure that I can figure out what was actually the case and how to best present that. And so research can take a long time. Or sometimes you get distracted and you look at a map and you find that there was a rope walk, and it only takes a little while for you to put out that post. But sometimes you'll hit, you know, a dead end. And so sometimes history can be lost to the ages. We might not ever know the origin of all of the street names. For example, Keppel Street, the reason that it all started, I still don't know. It's been 12 years. I have some leads, but nothing concrete yet. The street name was originally Fisher, and it was changed in the late 1800s. The day it was changed, Common Council changed the names of more than 100 other streets. So as you can imagine, no one was reporting detailed information about how each of those many streets were named. So despite not knowing Keppel Street, there's still a ton of information to be found, lots more to be uncovered, lots more to learn. So what's next? I have new street posts coming soon. I'm almost always kind of working on the next posts to come. I will also be speaking this spring through Erie County University Express program. Those sessions begin in March. They're still doing some of the scheduling for that. You can find out more about that through the Erie County website. I also am getting ready to lead walking tours again this summer. We've done them the last couple summers. It's been really fun to get out and walk around and talk history with people. So stay tuned on my blog. I'll be posting more about that this summer. I've also been doing a lot of research about downtown urban renewal. This started when COVID hit and I was stuck in my 1-bedroom apartment downtown going stir crazy. So I would start going on these long walks to keep myself sane. And I'd often walk past a building and then I'd run back and try to research what it was, if a building caught my eye, what used to be there. Then I started noticing a lot of the blocks where there's not that many buildings. And so I started doing more research about the urban renewal that had happened. So urban renewal was a series of programs in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that was built to clear out urban slums, things that were called slums at the time. And that really demolished a lot of urban fabric in Buffalo. So I mapped a building that was in downtown in 1950. This shows downtown, kind of the first neighborhoods downtown. Everything in blue is still seen, but everything in red is demolished. And so building and the use of the buildings, and I've been trying to do some research about that. I'm not really sure what it will look like, but this is one of my other side projects for the time being. I've written a couple posts about some of the neighborhoods. I've written about the Ellicott Mall. I've written about North Oak. And kind of how these neighborhoods saw major change during the urban renewal area. And so that's another thing that I'm kind of working on these days. So here's how you can contact me. My blog is buffalostreets.com. If you go to my site, and then there is a box where you can put in your email address to subscribe, and then it'll email you when I put out new posts. My email is buffalostreets@gmail.com, and then I'm also on Facebook and on Instagram. And so I guess we can open it up for questions.
Well, we certainly can do that. Angela, you've given us a wonderful overview of how we got to be who we are name-wise. And that's an important contribution. Thank you for that. The Museum of History, Buffalo History Museum, was well to give you that award back last fall. I noticed that your most recent post is that of Eldridge Spalding, an interesting person right on Main Street. And then in chatting about it with you, you mentioned how through Main Place, you've helped create the signage that's up and down Main Street, and you're continuing to do that. Just alert us to that signage. Where is it found? What does that entail?
Yeah, so as part of bringing car traffic back to Main Street and rebuilding Main Street, the car sharing Main Street project, one of Buffalo Place tasks as part of that has been to develop kind of an outdoor museum exhibit. And so there are history signs throughout the areas where the traffic has returned to the street. So that's right now the 500, 600, and 700 blocks. And the one side of the sign has a "You Are Here" map, kind of to give you some wayfinding. And then the other side tells history about things that were found on that block. Right now, we are currently working on the 100 block, the Lower Main project, which is very, very close to completion. They're rebuilding the subway stations right now, and then it'll be complete opening this spring. And so we're working on the history signs for that. And Elbridge Spalding had the Spalding Exchange down there. And so I think we'll be able to include some information about him on those signs. And being able to work in my professional career at Buffalo Place to do some history work is really fun, and a blending of my professional world and my hobby.
Wonderful. Well, we'll get you back for that. And the one you're describing, by the way, is right near the Key Center, right near
Yes.
Canal side, right? That in that area.
Yes.
You do have other signage, though. Who made the signage for Theater District and things of that sort? Is that yours?
Yeah, so those were created by Buffalo Place. Even actually before I worked here, I was actually on the committee, so I helped write those as well. And so there are signs on the 500 block, the 600 block, and the 700 block. So like through the Theater District and kind of by the Hyatt. I think we have 13 signs, maybe. 12 or 13 signs. You can also, so when you're downtown, and you're walking to Shays or whatever, feel free to stop and read. There's some really great information on those signs. You can also go to buffaloplace.com, and there is an area that says project information, and then you can go to downtown history, and there's a lot of information that is on our website as well.
Good. Melissa, do we have any questions?
We do have a few. The first question is asking for more details about the walking tours, such as an expected itinerary.
No.
Yeah, so I currently have 2 tours that I've done so far. One is Lower Main, which is kind of the area kind of near Canal Side, from Church Street down kind of to the water, and then Erie Street kind of makes a loop around there. I have another one that's downtown history then and now, which kind of walks around Lafayette Square and Niagara Square. I try to keep it about 1.5 miles, and it's usually in a loop. So it's usually about an 1.5 hour walk. And I'm hoping to add an additional tour this year. I'm kind of hoping to, in the next couple months, kind of put out a call for ideas. One thing I've been thinking about is doing a what used to be here kind of tour and showing some of the buildings that have changed over time. You know, cities are constantly evolving, and you know, in Buffalo, we kind of have this, well, they paved it over and they made a parking lot. But there were some neat buildings as well. You know, where Shays is was a fabulous residence called the Sherwood. And, you know, no one would say we shouldn't have Shays, but it's all part of, you know, development of cities over time. And so you can stay tuned on my blog for that. If you want to email me as well, buffalostreets@gmail.com, and I can send you more information when tour dates and stuff are finalized.
Good. And is there is a charge for this, or tell us more.
Yeah, so I've kept my tours free because I just think it's important. I accept donations, of course, if anyone is so willing. But I really enjoy, it's fun for me. And, you know, this is a hobby. I'm not making it out to be a business. And so I really enjoy doing it. And so they're free or very low cost.
Angela, I wanted to get that point across to people, and that's why this whole series is about volunteers that do so much behind the scenes for the good of the community. What else, Melissa? Any others?
Someone is asking if you have much information on the terrace. The ancestors had a plating business on the terrace, and I've wondered how to find where it was.
Neat. Yeah. I do have some information. That is a road that has been changed so many times through history. The railroad used to just go straight through it. There was one of Buffalo's first parks was on the terrace. And so it has changed a lot over time. If you want to email me, I can, you know, look at some historic maps, and maybe we can try to put some information together to try to figure out where it was located.
Mm-hmm. Any others, Melissa?
And then just the last question, what is your favorite story that you've uncovered to date?
I think it's Bishop Timon's story, Timon Street. One thing I really enjoyed learning about, he was the first Catholic bishop in Buffalo. He came to Buffalo in like 1847. He founded a lot of our institutions, Sisters Hospital. I went to Niagara University, and at Niagara, there's a picture of, you know, old man Timon on the wall in practically every classroom. And when I was researching him, you know, I thought that's what I'd be writing about. And I learned that when he had such a fascinating story. When he was growing up, he lived in St. Louis, and his father had a dry goods store, and apparently he was like the most sought after young man in town. And women would come multiple times to see him when he was working. And he was engaged to a young woman who unfortunately passed away. And around that same time, there was a panic, and the family lost their business. So he lost his fortune and his love. And that's what made him become a priest. And actually his first years of being a priest, he was on horseback in like the wild, wild west, going to serve these missions out in, you know, the West, and like San Antonio and I think Oklahoma. And so he had this whole fascinating life, and then he came to Buffalo and gave us all of these institutions. And so I thought that was one that I was really excited to learn about. It's also a really pretty street. If you're not familiar with Timon Street, there's still the big sycamore trees, there's the bricks. It's a relatively intact street. It's off of Best Street when you're heading like towards the Science Museum.
Yes, someone actually put in the comments that Timon is the most beautiful street in Buffalo with its sycamores and cobblestones.
Yep.
And sure to get some visitors now that has been pointed out.
Everybody's going to drive by.
Well, Angela, thank you so much for helping us see our own city that much better. names mean something, and you've helped discover what they mean for all of our benefits. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you.
Well done. Well, and we will get you back sooner than later to do more, if that's okay with you. All right.
Sounds good.
All right, good, especially around that canal side area and the Spalding story, things of that sort. Fair enough. All right. Well, folks, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you back here on Zoom next Tuesday as we hear from Kate Foll and Diane Picard of the Massachusetts Avenue Project. Now, that's a urban farm project that's included in the map area on the west side. So come back next week and hear all about it. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well and good day.